Tommy Harris had been a mechanic for as long as anyone in the small town of Willow Creek could remember. Every morning he arrived at the local auto shop before the sun came up, wiping his hands on the same old blue rag he had carried for years. His face always wore a kind smile, the kind that made people feel welcome even before he spoke a word. He wasn't a man of fancy words or expensive things. He just loved fixing engines and helping people. Tommy grew up in Willow Creek and never had dreams of leaving. He liked the slow rhythm of life there, the way neighbors waved from their porches, the smell of fresh coffee from the diner across the street, and the sound of church bells every Sunday morning. He rented a small house on the edge of town with his wife, who taught music at the local school. They didn't have much, but what they had was enough. Tommy always said, "If I can go to bed knowing I did something good today, then I'm rich in my own way." At the shop, Tommy was known for being the one everyone could count on. If someone couldn't afford a repair, he found a way to help. If a young kid was stuck on the side of the road, Tommy would close up early to give them a ride home. His boss, Mr. Denton, didn't always like that. Denton was a businessman through and through. He watched every penny, tracked every part, and didn't believe in giving discounts unless it benefited the company. Still, he tolerated Tommy because customers loved him, and they often returned just to shake his hand or thank him for being honest. Every morning, Tommy would whistle as he worked. He had a habit of talking to the cars he repaired, calling them by names like Old Faithful or the Little Fighter. His co-workers often teased him for it. "Tommy, you're too soft," one of them would joke. "These cars can't hear you." But Tommy would only smile and say, "Maybe not, but it makes the work feel lighter." He treated every job as if it mattered, because to him it did. He believed that fixing a car wasn't just about bolts and oil. It was about giving someone the freedom to live their life. A car meant a parent could drive their kids to school, or someone could make it to work on time. That meant something to Tommy. One cool October morning, as golden leaves danced down the street, Tommy arrived at the shop a bit earlier than usual. The air smelled like wet pavement and fresh bread from the bakery nearby. He turned on the lights, unlocked the front doors, and started brewing coffee in the old machine that rattled and hissed like it was ready to give up. He liked the quiet before everyone else arrived. It was his time to think and prepare for the day. As the sun began to rise, customers started coming in. There was Mr. Jenkins, who needed his old pickup checked again because the engine light wouldn't turn off, and a young woman whose car wouldn't start because of a dead battery. Tommy greeted each of them kindly, took their keys, and promised to take a look. By mid-morning, the shop was filled with the sound of wrenches clinking and air compressors humming. Tommy worked steadily, wiping sweat from his forehead, humming quietly to himself. The doorbell jingled as new customers came in and out. It was just another normal day until a moment that would change everything. Just before lunch, the front door opened again, and in came an elderly woman pushing a small old scooter. It looked like it hadn't been running for quite some time. The woman was petite and dressed in a worn gray coat. Her hands trembled slightly as she held onto the handlebars. Tommy looked up from under the hood of a car and smiled warmly. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, wiping his hands on his rag. "What can I do for you?" The woman smiled back, though her eyes looked tired. "Oh, hello, dear. I'm sorry to bother you, but my scooter's been acting up. It won't go more than a few feet without stopping. I rely on it to get around, and I don't know what to do." Tommy walked over and examined it closely. He could tell right away that a few parts were rusted, and the battery looked nearly dead. He gently lifted the seat and checked the wiring. "Well, it's nothing too serious," he said kindly. "It just needs a little care. I can get it running for you in no time." The woman hesitated, clutching her purse nervously. "That would be lovely, but I'm afraid I can't pay much. I live on a fixed income. I just needed to visit my husband's grave on Sundays. He's been gone for years, but I like to sit with him and talk for a while. It's the only time I feel close to him." Her voice trembled at the end, and Tommy's heart sank. He could see the sadness in her eyes, the kind that comes from years of quiet loneliness. He looked at the scooter again, then back at her. "Don't you worry about the money," he said softly. "I'll take care of it." "But," she started, but Tommy shook his head. "It won't take me long. I've got some spare parts lying around. You'll be back on the road before you know it." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You're very kind, young man. Not many people would do that nowadays." Tommy smiled, trying to hide the lump in his throat. "Just give me a few hours, all right?" She nodded. thanked him quietly, and went to sit on the small bench outside the shop. Tommy rolled the scooter into the corner of the garage and began working on it during his lunch break. While the others went to the diner for burgers, he stayed behind, tightening bolts, cleaning the motor, and replacing the old battery with one he had kept from a previous job. He even polished the scooter's metal parts to make it look new again. As he worked, he thought about his own mother, who had passed years ago. She used to ride a scooter just like this one to visit neighbors and go to church. Fixing it brought back memories of helping her in the garage as a kid, watching her smile when he managed to repair something small. An hour later, he turned the key, and the scooter hummed to life. Tommy grinned, proud and relieved. He wheeled it outside where the elderly woman sat, knitting quietly. When she saw him, her face lit up. "It's all fixed," he said cheerfully. "Runs good as new." The woman's eyes widened. "Oh my, you fixed it already?" "Sure did." "Go on, give it a try." She slowly stood up, holding onto the handlebars, and turned the key. The scooter purred softly beneath her. Her face broke into a wide smile, the kind that could melt anyone's heart. "Oh, bless you, young man. I don't know how to thank you." Tommy laughed lightly. "You just did." She reached into her purse and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "Please, take this. It's not much, but I want to give you something." Tommy gently pushed her hand back. "No, ma'am. You keep that. Maybe buy yourself some flowers when you visit your husband. That's payment enough for me." The woman stared at him, touched by his kindness. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You remind me of my son," she whispered. "He had a heart like yours." Tommy smiled softly, unsure what to say. "I'm glad I could help. Take care of yourself, all right?" She nodded, still wiping her tears, then drove away slowly, waving as she disappeared down the quiet street. Tommy stood there for a moment, watching her go, feeling that quiet warmth in his chest, the same feeling he got every time he helped someone in need. He turned back toward the shop, unaware that his simple act of kindness that morning would soon set off a chain of events that would change his life in ways he could never imagine. The next morning, Tommy woke up feeling lighthearted. He still thought about the elderly woman and the way her face had brightened when the scooter came to life. That smile had stayed in his mind all night. It wasn't about money or recognition for him. It was the quiet satisfaction that came from doing something good. His wife noticed the calm happiness on his face as he poured himself coffee. "Someone's in a good mood," she said with a grin. Tommy chuckled softly. "Just one of those mornings. Feels good to help someone, you know?" She smiled back. "You've always been that way, Tommy. Not everyone has your heart." He shrugged, embarrassed by the compliment, then kissed her cheek before heading out the door. The autumn air was cool and the streets of Willow Creek were still waking up. He drove his old pickup down the familiar road toward the shop, passing the bakery, the post office, and the same row of maple trees turning shades of orange and red. When he pulled into the parking lot, his coworker, Pete, was already there, sipping his usual cup of coffee and leaning against a car lift. "Morning, Tommy," Pete said. "Heard you stayed late yesterday. What were you up to?" Tommy smiled. "Just fixing up a little scooter for an older lady. Couldn't let her walk home in the cold." Pete raised an eyebrow. "You did it for free again, didn't you?" Tommy laughed. "Yeah, I guess I did." Pete shook his head, half amused, half concerned. "You've got a heart too big for this place, man. Don't let Denton find out. You know how he gets about using parts without writing it up?" Tommy's smile faded a little, but he brushed it off. "I'll deal with it if it comes up." "It wasn't company stuff anyway. Just an old battery I had lying around." Pete sighed. "All right, just be careful. You know how Denton loves his rules more than people?" Tommy didn't answer. He simply walked into the shop, tied his apron, and got to work. The familiar rhythm of the day began, tools clinking, engines rumbling, and the smell of oil filling the air. The hours passed quickly as he focused on each task, losing himself in the work he loved. Just after lunch, the door to the shop swung open with a sharp jingle. Mr. Denton walked in, his usual frown already in place. He was a heavy-set man with slicked back hair and a habit of tapping his pen against his clipboard when he was irritated. Everyone straightened up a little when he entered. "Morning, boss," Tommy said, wiping his hands. Denton didn't answer right away. He was looking around the shop, his eyes landing on the corner where Tommy had worked on the scooter the day before. "What's this about a scooter repair yesterday?" he asked finally. Tommy blinked. "Oh, that? Yeah, an elderly lady came in. Her scooter was giving her trouble, so I fixed it up for her." Denton's expression hardened. Did she pay for the work? Tommy hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. Well, no. It was a small job, really. I used my own parts. She didn't have much and she needed it to visit her husband's grave. The shop fell quiet. Pete looked away, pretending to focus on an engine while the other mechanics exchanged uneasy glances. Denton's jaw tightened. So, you used company time and company space to do unpaid work? He asked, his voice sharp. Tommy frowned slightly. I was on my lunch break. And like I said, I used my own parts. It wasn't about money, sir. She really needed the help. That's not the point, Denton snapped. We run a business here, not a charity. If we start fixing things for free, we'll be out of business by Christmas. Tommy tried to stay calm. I understand, sir. But it didn't cost the shop anything. I just didn't feel right turning her away. Denton crossed his arms. You think you know better than me how to run this place? No, sir, Tommy said quietly. I just think kindness doesn't need a price tag. Denton's face turned red. I don't want to hear another word of this nonsense. You broke company policy. You should have come to me first. Tommy looked down, frustrated but still respectful. I'm sorry if I overstepped. It won't happen again. Denton's tone grew cold. No, it won't. You're done here, Harris. The words hit Tommy like a hammer. For a moment he thought he'd misheard. Sir? You're fired, Denton said flatly. Clean out your locker. The room went silent. Pete's mouth opened, but he didn't say anything. The other workers froze, unsure what to do. Tommy stared at his boss, disbelief written all over his face. You're firing me for helping someone? He asked softly. Denton tapped his pen against the clipboard, not meeting his eyes. I'm firing you for not following rules. You're a good mechanic, Harris, but this shop doesn't need heroes. It needs workers who follow instructions. Tommy wanted to argue, but he knew it wouldn't help. Denton's mind was made up. So, he nodded slowly, walked to the back room, and began packing his things. The small locker didn't hold much. An old photograph of his wife, a few tools he'd bought himself, and his lucky blue rag. His hands trembled slightly as he closed the locker door for the last time. Pete walked over, shaking his head. I can't believe this, man. It's not right. Tommy gave him a faint smile. It's all right. Maybe it's just time for something new. As he walked out of the shop, the cool air hit his face, and he took a deep breath. He felt heavy, not angry, just sad. The job had been more than work to him. It was part of who he was. Helping people through it made him feel useful, connected. Now he didn't know what would come next. When he got home earlier than usual, his wife looked surprised. She set down her cup of tea and frowned. You're home early. Is everything okay? Tommy sat down at the kitchen table, his voice soft. Not really. I got fired. Her eyes widened. What? Why? He told her the story from beginning to end. The woman, the scooter, Denton's anger. She listened quietly, her expression moving from shock to sadness to disbelief. That's ridiculous, she said finally. You did the right thing. Tommy nodded, staring down at his hands. I know. But sometimes doing the right thing comes with a cost. She reached across the table and took his hand. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. You're a good man, Tommy. And good things come back around. They always do, he smiled weakly. I hope so. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the moment in his mind. The look on Denton's face, the silence in the shop, the sound of the door closing behind him. He wondered if he should have just stayed quiet, followed the rules, and ignored the woman's plea for help. But then he pictured her smile again, the way her eyes had lit up when the scooter started. Oh, he wouldn't take that back for anything. Early the next morning, Tommy sat on the front porch with a cup of coffee. The sun was just beginning to rise over the rooftops, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. The street was still quiet except for the sound of birds and the faint rumble of cars in the distance. He felt lost, but also strangely at peace. Then something unusual caught his eye. Down the road, a sleek black car was turning the corner, followed by another. And another. Within minutes, a whole line of shiny, expensive cars began pulling up along the curb in front of his modest house. Tommy blinked in disbelief. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, and luxury SUVs. More than he had ever seen in one place. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, curious about the unexpected sight. Tommy set his coffee down and stood up, his heart pounding with confusion. The car doors opened one by one, and men and women in formal clothes stepped out. They looked important, like people who belonged in big cities, not small towns. Tommy had no idea what was happening, but deep down, something told him that this strange parade had something to do with the kindness he had shown just 2 days ago. Whatever it was, his life was about to take a turn he could never have imagined. Tommy stood frozen on his front porch, watching as the line of shining cars filled the narrow street. It was like something out of a movie. The morning sun glinted off the polished metal, and people were already stepping out in neat suits and elegant dresses. He had never seen anything like it in Willow Creek. For a moment, he wondered if they had the wrong house. He rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe he was still half asleep. His wife came to the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Tommy, what in the world is going on?" she whispered, peeking over his shoulder. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but it sure looks serious." The first car door opened, and out stepped the elderly woman he had helped just 2 days earlier. But she looked completely different. Gone was the old gray coat and the trembling hands. She wore a beautiful cream-colored outfit and carried herself with quiet confidence. Behind her came 2 younger men and a woman, all dressed in suits. They looked like they belonged to a world far from small-town garages. The woman smiled warmly as she walked toward Tommy's porch. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice stronger than before. "I hope we're not intruding too early." Tommy blinked in surprise. "Not at all, ma'am. But what's all this? Is everything all right?" She chuckled softly. "More than all right. I came to thank you properly." He looked confused. "Thank me? You already did. I was happy to help," she nodded slowly. "I know you were. But there's more you need to know about me. My name isn't just Mrs. Whitmore, it's Evelyn Whitmore. My family owns Whitmore Motors." Tommy's eyes widened. He had heard that name before. Whitmore Motors was one of the biggest car companies in the state, maybe even the country. Their commercials were on TV all the time. He stared at her, speechless. "I didn't mean to deceive you," she continued. "But I often go out on my own, dressed plainly, to see how people treat others. My late husband and I started that company together, and we always believed kindness was the most valuable quality a person could have. Lately, I've been disappointed by how rare it's become. But then I met you." Tommy didn't know what to say. His wife stepped beside him, equally stunned. Mrs. Whitmore smiled gently. "You didn't hesitate to help a stranger. You didn't ask for money or recognition. You gave from your heart. That kind of goodness is hard to find." He scratched the back of his neck, embarrassed. "I just did what felt right, ma'am. Didn't think much of it." The younger man beside her stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore told us everything. She wanted to meet the man who reminded her what our company was built on: honesty, compassion, and service." Tommy was still struggling to take it all in. He gestured toward the line of cars. "I appreciate all this, but you didn't need to go to any trouble." "Really?" Mrs. Whitmore smiled knowingly. "Sometimes gratitude deserves a little trouble." She motioned for someone to bring something from one of the cars. A man in a dark suit returned, holding a small box. She took it gently and handed it to Tommy. Inside was a gleaming gold plaque engraved with the words, "For acts of kindness beyond measure, Whitmore Motors Humanitarian Award." Tommy stared at it, still in disbelief. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," she replied warmly. "But this isn't all. I came here for another reason." Tommy's heart skipped a beat. "Another reason?" "Yes," she said, her smile widening. "Yesterday I spoke with our board of directors. We're opening a new branch just outside Willow Creek. I'd like you to run it as head mechanic and supervisor. Double your old pay, full benefits, and a team of your choosing." For a long moment, Tommy couldn't speak. His wife gasped softly, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, Tommy," she whispered. He looked at Mrs. Whitmore, his voice shaky. "You're offering me a job? After what happened?" She nodded firmly. "Not just a job. A fresh start. People like you deserve to be part of something that values heart as much as skill. You represent everything my husband built this company for." Tommy swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you." Mrs. Whitmore smiled kindly. "You already have by being who you are." The neighbors had started to gather quietly across the street, whispering to one another, trying to make sense of what was happening. A few of them waved, smiling proudly. Everyone in town knew Tommy as the man who never turned anyone away. Seeing those luxury cars outside his modest home was something no one would forget. Mrs. Whitmore looked around and said softly, "Do you mind if I step inside for a moment? I'd love to meet your wife properly." "Of course, ma'am," his wife said warmly. stepping aside to welcome her in. Inside, the house was small but neat. Family photos lined the walls and the faint smell of coffee filled the air. Mrs. Whitmore looked at the photos with a gentle smile. "You've built a lovely home. Simple but full of warmth. I can see why you wanted to stay here." Tommy smiled faintly. "We like it quiet. It's not much, but it's ours." She nodded approvingly. "You remind me of my husband. He always said wealth means nothing without kindness. You've proved him right." As they talked, Tommy's wife offered tea and the guests sat for a while. It was an odd sight. People in expensive suits sitting comfortably in a small-town kitchen, laughing and chatting as if they'd known each other for years. But there was no arrogance in their tone, only respect. Everyone seemed genuinely grateful to be there. After a while, Mrs. Whitmore stood and said, "Before I go, there's one more thing I'd like to do." She reached into her purse and handed Tommy an envelope. "Inside is an advance for your new position. Consider it a welcome gift. The rest will be handled once we finalize the paperwork next week." Tommy hesitated, reluctant to open it. "You've already done too much, ma'am." "I can't, please," she said softly. "You've earned it. My husband used to say that good deeds deserve to be met with good fortune. Let this be a reminder that doing the right thing is never wasted." Finally, Tommy opened the envelope. His eyes widened at the sight of the check inside. It was more money than he'd ever seen in one place. His wife covered her mouth in shock. For a moment, they were both too stunned to speak. Mrs. Whitmore chuckled softly. "It's just a start. You'll be running a fine workshop soon, and you'll need the right tools and staff. Think of it as an investment in your kindness." Tommy's throat tightened. He didn't know how to express what he felt. Gratitude, disbelief, joy, all mixed together. "Thank you, ma'am. I don't know how I'll ever repay this." Mrs. Whitmore smiled. "You already have. Just promise me you'll keep helping people. That's all I ask." He nodded firmly. "You have my word." With that, she extended her hand and Tommy shook it. Her grip was firm but warm, and for a moment they both simply smiled at each other. Then she turned to leave. As she walked out the door, the line of cars slowly began to move again, one by one, until they disappeared down the street, leaving behind a stunned but joyful silence. Tommy stood there for a long time, watching until the last car vanished. His wife came up beside him and slipped her arm around his waist. Neither of them spoke. The crisp morning air felt different now, lighter, full of promise. Finally, Tommy laughed softly, shaking his head. "You know, I was worried yesterday that I'd made a mistake helping that lady. I guess I was wrong." His wife smiled up at him. "You were never wrong, Tommy. You just finally met someone who sees the world the same way you do." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tommy sat on his porch again. The town was quiet, the street empty once more. He thought about how quickly life could change, from losing his job to being given a chance beyond his wildest dreams. But more than anything, he thought about Mrs. Whitmore's words. Doing the right thing is never wasted. He leaned back, watching the sky turn shades of orange and purple, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, peace mixed with hope. Whatever came next, he knew he would face it with the same heart that had guided him all along. And somewhere far away, in a grand mansion overlooking the city, Mrs. Whitmore smiled as she looked out her window, proud that her small test had found a man who still believed in kindness when the world so often forgot. The next few days felt like a dream to Tommy. Every morning he woke up half expecting to find out that everything had been in his imagination. But it was all real. The job offer, the visit, and the new opportunity waiting for him. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate him. Customers who used to bring their cars to his old shop came to shake his hand, and even strangers from nearby towns sent letters saying how much his story had inspired them. He wasn't used to attention, and though he appreciated everyone's kindness, he stayed humble. "I just fixed a scooter," he'd say with a laugh. That's all. But deep down he knew it was more than that. It was proof that doing something good, no matter how small, could change everything. One morning, Tommy drove to the construction site where the new Whitmore Motors branch was being built. The land stretched wide and open just outside town, with fresh concrete slabs and shiny metal frames rising from the ground. Workers waved as he arrived. He parked his old pickup beside a line of new trucks and stepped out, feeling slightly out of place but proud. A man in a hard hat approached him. "You must be Mr. Harris," he said with a friendly grin. "Mrs. Whitmore told us you'd be stopping by. I'm the site manager. We're on track to open in 2 months." Tommy nodded, taking it all in. "Looks like you're making great progress. This place is going to be something special." "It will be," the man said. "Especially with someone like you running it." Tommy smiled awkwardly, not knowing how to respond to praise. He wandered through the half-finished building, imagining the workbenches, tools, and cars that would soon fill the space. It would be the biggest garage he'd ever worked in. But what mattered most to him wasn't the size. It was the chance to build something meaningful, a place where people could come not just for service, but for trust. That evening, as he sat on the porch with his wife, she handed him a steaming cup of tea. "You look deep in thought," she said. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking about everything that's happened." "It's a lot to take in," she nodded. "You deserve every bit of it. You worked hard your whole life. It's nice to see the world finally noticing." Tommy sipped his tea and looked out at the quiet street. "It's strange. 1 week ago I thought I'd lost everything. Now I feel like I've been given more than I could have ever asked for. It doesn't feel real." His wife reached for his hand. "Sometimes life surprises us. Maybe this was meant to happen." Before he could respond, a car pulled up outside. A familiar voice called out, "Evening, Mr. Harris." It was Pete, his old coworker. Tommy smiled and waved him over. Pete climbed the porch steps with a grin. "You've become a local hero, you know that? Folks at the shop haven't stopped talking about you." Tommy laughed. "Hero's a strong word. I just did what anyone with a bit of heart would do." "Not everyone would have," Pete said, shaking his head. "Denton's been in a foul mood ever since. Business isn't the same without you. Word got around about what he did and people stopped coming. He's been losing customers left and right." Tommy frowned. "That's unfortunate. I never wanted anything bad to happen to him. I just wish he'd seen things differently." Pete nodded. "Maybe he will. Sometimes it takes a while for people to learn what really matters." After Pete left, Tommy sat quietly for a while, thinking about his old boss. As much as he disliked how Denton had treated him, he didn't hold anger in his heart. If anything, he hoped the man would realize that treating people with kindness wasn't weakness. It was strength. A week later, Tommy got a letter from Mrs. Whitmore inviting him to visit the company's main office in the city. It was a formal meeting, she wrote, but nothing to worry about. He would meet the board and go over the plans for his new role. Tommy had never been to such a big corporate building before. The tallest thing in Willow Creek was the old church steeple. The morning of the meeting, he put on his cleanest shirt and drove his pickup to the city. The traffic, the tall glass buildings, and the rush of people made him feel small. But he reminded himself of Mrs. Whitmore's words, "You belong here." When he walked into the lobby of Whitmore Motors headquarters, he couldn't help but stare. The floor gleamed like polished stone, and large photos of smiling employees hung on the walls. The receptionist greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Harris. Mrs. Whitmore is expecting you." He followed her to an elevator, his heart beating fast. When the doors opened, Mrs. Whitmore was waiting with that same kind smile. "Tommy," she said, extending her hand. "I'm so glad you came." "Wouldn't miss it, ma'am," he said, shaking her hand. She guided him into a large conference room where several men and women sat around a long wooden table. "Everyone," she said, "this is the man I've been telling you about." There was a quiet murmur of greetings. Tommy nodded politely, feeling out of his element but holding his head high. Mrs. Whitmore introduced him properly, sharing the story of the scooter and how his simple act of kindness had inspired her. "He reminded me," she said, "that no matter how big our company grows, it should always have a heart." When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Tommy's cheeks turned red and he rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to do. One of the directors smiled. "Mr. Harris, it's an honor. People like you remind us why this company exists in the first place." "Thank you," Tommy said quietly. "I just did what anyone should do." After the meeting, Mrs. Whitmore gave him a tour of the facility. Rows of cars in development, engineers at work, designers sketching ideas. She pointed out how much of the company's success came from treating workers like family. "That's why I chose you," she said. "You don't just fix cars, you understand people," Tommy smiled. "Well, ma'am, I've learned that engines and people aren't all that different. Both need care, patience, and a little understanding to run right." Mrs. Whitmore laughed softly. "Exactly." When he returned home that evening, his wife was waiting with dinner and candles on the table. "So how did it go?" she asked eagerly. He grinned. "Better than I ever imagined. They made me feel like I belong. Mrs. Whitmore wants me to help design the new workshop and even mentor some young mechanics once it opens." Her eyes sparkled. "That's wonderful, Tommy. You're going to change lives." "I don't know about that," he said modestly. "But if I can help someone find the joy in honest work, that's good enough for me." Days turned into weeks, and construction on the new branch continued smoothly. Tommy spent his time helping with the layout, where each station should go, what tools were needed, how to make things easier for both customers and workers. He treated everyone with the same respect he always had, from builders to delivery drivers. It didn't matter who they were. Tommy believed everyone deserved kindness. One afternoon, as he stood by the fence watching the workers, a familiar car pulled up. He turned and saw Mr. Denton step out. The older man looked tired, his once perfect hair slightly messy, his expression uneasy. Tommy's first thought was concern. "Mr. Denton," he said politely. "Didn't expect to see you here." Denton hesitated before walking closer. "Tommy, I heard you're running the new Whitmore shop." Tommy nodded. "That's right," Denton sighed. "I wanted to come by and say, I was wrong. I shouldn't have fired you. I let rules get in the way of doing what was right. And now, well, the shop's closing. We lost too many customers. I guess people noticed the difference when you left." Tommy looked at him, his heart heavy but kind. "I'm sorry to hear that. I never wanted that to happen." "I know," Denton said softly. "You're a better man than me." "Always were," Tommy smiled faintly. "We all make mistakes, sir. What matters is what we learn from them." Denton nodded slowly. "If you ever need another pair of hands, I'd be honored to work for you." Tommy thought for a moment, then extended his hand. "We'll find a place for you. Everyone deserves a second chance." Denton's eyes widened in surprise. He shook Tommy's hand firmly, gratitude clear on his face. "Thank you, Harris. You've got a good heart." When Denton drove away, Tommy stood quietly for a moment, watching the dust settle on the road. He smiled to himself. Life had a funny way of turning things around. Sometimes the people who doubted you the most were the ones who ended up learning from your example. As the sun set that evening, Tommy looked over the nearly finished workshop and felt something deep inside, a sense of peace, pride, and purpose. He had lost a job but found something far greater. And he knew this was just the beginning of something beautiful, not just for him but for everyone around him who believed in the power of kindness. The morning of the grand opening arrived bright and calm. The air was filled with the sound of birds and the faint hum of cars passing by. Tommy stood in front of the new Whitmore Motor Service Center, looking at the clean glass doors that reflected the golden sunrise. The sign above the entrance shined proudly, and a red ribbon stretched across the front. For a moment, Tommy just stood there, taking it all in. He could hardly believe this place, so full of life and promise, had grown from one simple act of kindness. His wife joined him, smiling softly as she adjusted the ribbon on his shirt. "You nervous?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "More than a little," Tommy said with a quiet laugh. "Feels strange being the one people are coming to see." "You've earned it," she said gently. "Just be yourself. That's what got you here." People began to arrive one by one. Workers, neighbors, old customers, and even folks from nearby towns. The parking lot slowly filled with cars, and among them were several gleaming luxury vehicles. When the doors of those cars opened, men and women in fine suits stepped out, followed by Mrs. Whitmore herself. She looked graceful as always, her smile warm and welcoming. She walked straight to Tommy and gave him a hug. "You did it," she said, her voice full of pride. "Everything looks perfect." Tommy shook his head modestly. "It was a team effort, ma'am. I just wanted to build a place people could trust." "That's exactly what this is," she said. "And you've given it a heart." As the crowd gathered, Mrs. Whitmore took the microphone to speak. She told everyone the story of the scooter, how Tommy had helped her without asking for anything in return. She spoke about how his simple act had reminded her that success means nothing without kindness. The crowd listened in silence, many with tears in their eyes. Then she handed the microphone to Tommy. He hesitated for a moment, his heart racing. He wasn't used to giving speeches. But when he looked at the faces around him, his wife, his friends, the workers who'd built this place, he found his voice. I never thought something small could make such a big difference, he began. All I did was fix a scooter. I didn't do it for money or recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. My father once told me that a good mechanic fixes more than machines. He helps people get moving again. That's what I've tried to do every day. I just never thought it would lead here. He paused, taking a deep breath. I'm grateful for this chance, and I promise this place will always be about honesty, hard work, and kindness. Because those things matter more than any paycheck or title. Thank you for believing in me. The crowd erupted into applause. Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward, handed him a large pair of scissors, and said, "Let's make it official." Together they cut the ribbon. The crowd cheered and music began to play. The sound of laughter filled the air as people explored the new service center, admiring the spotless bays, shiny tools, and rows of freshly polished cars. Reporters from local newspapers came to take photos and ask questions. One young journalist asked, "What's the secret to your success?" Tommy smiled. "No secret," he said. "Just be kind. It's simple, but it changes everything." Later that afternoon, after the ceremony ended, Tommy took a quiet walk through the workshop. The smell of new paint and clean metal filled the air. Every workbench was organized, every tool in its place. He stopped at one station where a young apprentice was working on a car. "Need a hand?" Tommy asked. The young man looked up, surprised. "Oh, Mr. Harris. I'm just checking the wiring." "Call me Tommy," he said with a grin. "You're doing fine. Just remember to listen to the car. It tells you what's wrong if you pay attention." The apprentice nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir." Tommy moved along, stopping to talk with each worker. He made sure everyone felt appreciated and understood. He remembered what it felt like to be new, nervous and uncertain. He wanted everyone here to feel at home. That evening, as the sun began to set, Mrs. Whitmore invited Tommy and his wife to dinner at a nearby restaurant. They sat in a private room with a view of the town lights. Over the meal, Mrs. Whitmore shared stories about her late husband and how they had started their company, with only a single garage and a dream. "You remind me of him," she said softly. "He believed that every act of kindness was an investment. Not in money, but in people. He would have loved to see what you've built here." Tommy smiled. "I'm honored, ma'am. I just hope I can live up to what you and your husband built." "You already have," she said with a gentle smile. "This isn't just a business, it's a legacy. And you're part of it now." After dinner, as they walked outside, the town seemed peaceful. The stars twinkled above, and a cool breeze brushed against Tommy's face. He looked at his wife, who slipped her hand into his. "Feels like everything's finally come together," she said. He nodded. "Yeah, but it's not about what I've gained. It's about what I can give back," she smiled. "That's exactly why you deserve all this." The next morning, Tommy arrived early at the workshop. The place was quiet except for the sound of birds outside. He opened the big garage doors and watched the sunlight flood in. He took a deep breath and felt grateful for the second chances, the people who believed in him, and even the hard times that led him here. Soon, cars began to roll in. Customers greeted him warmly, some of them older folks who had heard his story. One woman smiled and said, "You fixed my neighbor's car for free last winter." "She still talks about it." Tommy chuckled. "Glad to hear it's still running." By noon, the shop was busy. Mechanics worked side by side. Laughter echoed through the bays, and the smell of oil and coffee filled the air. Tommy moved from station to station, offering advice, lending tools, and checking in with customers. He felt at peace here, surrounded by the sound of engines and the steady rhythm of honest work. In the middle of the afternoon, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Mr. Denton. He looked different, less proud, more humble. Tommy wiped his hands and walked over with a smile. "You came," he said warmly. Denton nodded. "I wanted to see it for myself." "You've built something real here, Harris." "Not just me," Tommy said. "A lot of good people helped make it happen." Denton hesitated before speaking. "I meant what I said before. Thank you for giving me another chance. I'd like to work here if you'll have me. Even if it's just sweeping floors." Tommy looked him in the eye. "You're better than that, Denton. Everyone deserves a fresh start. There's a desk in the office. You'll be handling customer service. People know you, and that still counts for something." Denton looked surprised. "You'd trust me with that?" Tommy smiled. "Trust grows when you give it a chance." For a moment, Denton said nothing. Then he nodded, his voice low. "Thank you, Harris. I won't let you down. The day ended with a quiet satisfaction. As the sun dipped low, Tommy stood outside watching the light fade across the parking lot. He could hear the sound of laughter from inside, the hum of conversation, the closing of toolboxes. It was the sound of a new beginning. Mrs. Whitmore's car pulled up one last time that evening. She stepped out and looked around, smiling at the busy shop. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You've turned this place into something alive." Tommy smiled. "It's not just me. It's everyone who believed in doing good work," she nodded. "And that's what makes it special. Keep leading with heart, Tommy. The world needs more people like you." As she drove away, Tommy stood for a long time, his hands in his pockets, the night air cool around him. The lights from the workshop glowed behind him, a symbol of everything he had worked for. He thought about the old scooter that had started it all and how one simple act of kindness had changed his entire life. He smiled to himself. Maybe his father had been right. When you fix something with love, you fix more than just machines. You fix hearts too. Months passed and life settled into a peaceful rhythm for Tommy. The workshop thrived, the team worked like a family, and customers kept returning with smiles on their faces. Every day felt like a blessing. People trusted Whitmore Motors not just because of the cars or repairs, but because of the feeling they got when they walked through the doors. It was a place filled with honesty, respect, and care. Tommy made sure it stayed that way. He never forgot where it all started, with an elderly woman's broken scooter. Sometimes he'd tell that story to new apprentices, not to boast, but to remind them that kindness is never wasted. "You never know who's watching or how one good deed can change your life," he'd say with a gentle smile. And they'd always listen closely, because his words carried the weight of real experience. One quiet afternoon, as he was checking paperwork in his office, Tommy heard a knock on the door. It was his wife holding a small brown envelope. "This came in the mail," she said, handing it over. Tommy looked at the handwriting. It was from Mrs. Whitmore. He opened it carefully and unfolded the letter. Her words were written neatly in blue ink. "Dear Tommy," it began, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done, not just for me but for everyone who has crossed your path. You've brought life into our company and reminded us all of what truly matters. My health has been a little fragile lately, so I'll be stepping back from the business for a while. But I want you to know that I trust you completely. The new branch is now under your full care. Continue to lead with heart as you always have. You've become part of our family. With gratitude, Evelyn Whitmore." Tommy sat in silence for a moment, reading the letter again. He felt a deep wave of emotion wash over him. His wife put her hand on his shoulder. "She really believes in you," she said softly. He nodded slowly. "I just hope I can live up to that trust." That evening, after closing time, Tommy gathered his team. He shared the letter with them, reading it aloud. When he finished, there was a quiet stillness in the room. Then one of the younger mechanics spoke up. "We'll make her proud, boss." "All of us," Tommy smiled. "That's all I could ever ask for." As time went on, the workshop continued to grow. They opened 2 more branches in nearby towns, each one built with the same values Tommy had started with: honesty, quality, and kindness. He personally trained every head mechanic, teaching them not just about engines but about people. "Listen more than you speak," he'd tell them. "Every customer has a story, and if you take the time to hear it, you'll fix more than just their car." One Saturday morning, an elderly man came into the shop with a small motorbike that looked older than most of the workers there. "She's been with me for 50 years, the man said, patting the bike gently. "Don't want a new one. Just want her to keep running." Tommy grinned. "We'll take good care of her, sir." "I promise," the man smiled back. "That's why I came here. Folks say you treat people like family." Those words stuck with Tommy. He had never aimed to build an empire, only a community, and that was exactly what the workshop had become. People came not only for repairs but for connection, for trust, for comfort in knowing there was still good in the world. A few months later, Tommy received another letter. This time it came from a law firm representing Mrs. Whitmore. For a moment his heart sank, worried that something bad had happened. He opened it carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a short note and a legal document. The note read, "Mrs. Whitmore has left you a gift to thank you for your kindness and integrity. She wanted you to continue her legacy, to help others as you've always done." The document showed that she had transferred ownership of the new service center to him entirely. The land, the building, everything. It was now his. Tommy sat back in his chair, speechless. His wife stood beside him, tears welling in her eyes. "She believed in you more than anyone," she whispered. He swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know what to say. I didn't do any of this for a reward." "I know," she said softly. "That's why you deserve it." The following week, the team gathered for a small ceremony in Mrs. Whitmore's honor. They planted a tree just outside the workshop, a strong oak that would grow for generations. Tommy spoke quietly as they stood around it. "She taught me that success isn't measured by money, but by the lives you touch. And I promise we'll keep her spirit alive in everything we do." Over the next few years, Tommy became a well-known figure in the community, not because he was wealthy or famous, but because he was trusted. He sponsored local schools, fixed cars for struggling families, and gave free repairs to veterans and elderly folks who couldn't afford them. Whenever someone thanked him, he'd smile and say, "Don't thank me. Thank the woman who believed in kindness." One afternoon, a young reporter visited the shop for an interview. She asked him, "What's the most important thing you've learned through all of this?" Tommy thought for a moment before answering. "That kindness never goes unnoticed," he said. "It may take time and you may not see it right away, but it always comes back around." "Maybe not in the way you expect, but it does," she smiled. "Do you think the world still has room for kindness?" He looked around the workshop. His workers laughing, customers chatting, a child playing with a toy car near the waiting area. "As long as people keep believing in each other," he said, "there's always room." Years later, as Tommy grew older, he decided to step back and let some of his younger mechanics take over. He chose one of his apprentices, a hard-working young man with the same honest eyes he once had. "You remind me of myself," Tommy told him. "Take care of this place and take care of people. That's what matters." The young man nodded earnestly. "I will, sir. You've shown us all what it means to do things the right way." Tommy smiled and handed him the keys. "Then I know it's in good hands." After that, he spent more time at home with his wife, tending to his garden and enjoying the simple peace of everyday life. Sometimes he'd drive by the shop just to see it busy and full of life. The sight always made him smile. One day, as he sat on his porch, a familiar hum caught his ear. He looked up to see a small scooter rolling down the street, the same kind he had fixed so long ago. A young woman was riding it, waving to neighbors as she passed. For a moment, Tommy felt tears sting his eyes. Life had come full circle. His wife joined him outside, setting 2 cups of tea on the table. "What's got you smiling like that?" she asked. Tommy chuckled softly. "Just thinking about how funny life is. One small act can start something you'd never imagine." She sat beside him, her hand resting over his. "You've done more good than you realize." He looked at her, his eyes warm. "Maybe, but if I've learned anything, it's that kindness doesn't need to be big to matter. Sometimes it's as simple as fixing a scooter for someone who needs it." They sat together quietly, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The street was calm, the town peaceful. In that moment, Tommy felt a deep sense of contentment. He hadn't just built a workshop, he'd built a legacy of goodness that would outlast him. And as the evening breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree outside the shop, the same one they had planted for Mrs. Whitmore, Tommy smiled to himself. Life had shown him that kindness was the strongest engine of all. It kept the world running, one good deed at a time.